All right, now let's bring in political analyst Thobani Zikalala to discuss these developments. Good afternoon to you. Firstly, just your reaction to Ntuli's announcement of his members of his executive committee. Of course, the Umkhonto weSizwe Party and the EFF will occupy opposition benches in the provincial house, we see.
Good afternoon. I mean, the initial reaction is on the basis of saying it's still mixed feelings in terms of trying to understand the type of thinking that went into the negotiations that ended up with the type of lineup that we have. But of course, as maybe what one can say is that it seems that it's a big win in particular for former opposition parties like your DAIFP and the National Freedom Party, in particular the National Freedom Party, which came in this provincial legislature with one member of the provincial legislature and scored themselves an MEC post, and of course an important post in terms of social development. I mean, how he has reconfigured his government, it's interesting how, for example, ideological, what you call disagreements will play out. I mean, he says that it should be bode well for this cabinet, the fact that they come from different political homes, but I feel that maybe that's going to be the starting point where they will differ. And in particular, if you look, for example, at a post like a portfolio like the economic development, which has been given to a DA leader, Francois Rogers. I mean, in terms of thinking, it's going to be very important in terms of how we think about economic development, in particular the economic disparities in terms of ownership of the economy and participation in the province as rich like KwaZulu-Natal. And Francois Rogers coming from the DA, and of course, a thinking that says the states must be less involved in economic development. It's going to be interesting in terms of how then that plays out, and of course maybe in other ministries like your public works and others. But of course it's a deal that was going to maybe come out like this, where no one was going to get maybe absolute control. Everyone would get the little bit that have got. But I believe that the former opposition parties, the IFP, DA and NFP, are in particular going to come out as the biggest winners here. I mean, the ANC comes out from controlling the province, and they find themselves now, of course, still controlling very key portfolios in terms of human settlement, education, and others. But it's going to be very, very interesting in terms of how this government moves forward, especially if you have a party like the MK party carrying the 37 members of that provincial legislature, in terms of how it's going to be monitored and how real oversight work is going to be done. That's where I think that's going to be key in terms of how making sure that this government works.
And I want to come back to the MK party, but let's just stay with the IFP at the moment. I mean, this, for the first time since 2004, the IFP is back at the helm. What does this symbolize for them? I mean, if you were listening to Ntuli's speech, for instance, he says his government will prioritize fighting crime and bringing stability to the province, stability being the key word there. I mean, just given the highly contested province coming into, the elections and, the position of the MK party, what should Ntuli's priorities be, just given the dynamics at play here?
I mean, it is no secret that the province of KwaZulu-Natal is faced with a high crime rates, and in particular violent crimes and things like that. That's no secret. But I always believe that any government, if it's really interested in solving social issues, its interest must be how they deal with the issue of economic disparities, issues of economic ownership, economic participation, issues of education and social development. Because the issue of crime is merely maybe just an offshoot of real fundamental problems that need to be dealt with. And if we prioritize crime, it almost, and without prioritizing the structuring of the economy and participation, we are almost dealing with the tail end of the issue without really dealing with the crux of it. We really need to deal with how citizens of KwaZulu-Natal are able to participate in their economy, issues of economic ownership, issues of ownership of the land and things like that, because all those things really creates the kind of society that we live in. Without dealing with those key fundamental issues, we will not be able to solve crime, because sometimes you find that some of these crimes are really attached to economic interest. And if you look at how the province of KwaZulu-Natal is, most of the real big crimes are really associated into economic interests. So if maybe we focus on reshaping, reorganizing, and reconfiguring the economy, maybe we'll be on a good start to try and solve the other options like unemployment, crime, and other issues. And for me, that's where the premier should start at. And if of course the IFP comes in now with almost 20 years of not being out of the running of the province, having run it for 2 terms. I mean, for them, it's a good thing. They've been out. It seems that they did very well to try and put themselves in a position where they could be part of government, to be able to show the people of KwaZulu-Natal that they can run the province.
And Mr. Zikalala, as we wrap,
African National.
Yeah, I think we've got the gist of what he has to do. But as we wrap our conversation, I want to go back to that point where we said we were going to touch on the MK party. I mean, the IFP is in the position that it's in now. Many are saying, of course, is because the MK party really fumbled in negotiations in these coalition talks. Because, I mean, if you look at it in terms of the votes that they received the most votes in that particular province, but they don't seem to have a coordinated strategy at this point in time. You know, just what do you make of where it sits now as the MK party? Briefly, if you can.
I think the MK party sits in a very interesting space. One, I believe that because they've only been around for about 5 to 6 months, they've not been able to really build a strong organization to be able to withstand some of the challenges that they are facing now. They were in a position where they should have been driving the negotiations of the forming of the new government, and in particular, they did not find themselves in that position. But on the other side, we must also be sympathetic to the MK party, because part of the negotiations and part of some of these parties that are now forming government were really clear that they don't want anything to do with the MK, and in particular the EFF. So you then find yourself in a very dicey situation where you are the majority party, you should be leading negotiations, and of course maybe you fumble that, but also you are in a position where these opposition parties, some of them don't really want to work with you, in particular the DA. I mean, for example, if we say the MK party should have been part of the government of national unity, how then do we form part of it when the DA is very clear that they want nothing to do with you? I mean, it's a very dicey political situation, but I hope maybe the MK party learns from this, builds a strong organization, and be able to play a very key political oversight role in that legislation.